Bally Mansion in Philadelphia certainly sounds like the perfect setting for a haunting tale. This historic mansion, with its mysterious deaths and lingering souls, is steeped in legends and whispers of the paranormal. It could be said that each room holds secrets, as if the mansion itself remembers those who have come and gone and perhaps even those who have never left. Visitors and paranormal enthusiasts claim they've experienced cold spots, unexplainable sounds, and even glimpses of shadowy figures wandering the halls. Bally Mansion loomed at the edge of Philadelphia, shrouded in shadows even on the brightest days. The townsfolk spoke of it in hushed voices, avoiding its grounds as though the building itself were cursed. Built in the 1800s, the mansion had passed through the hands of wealthy families, each one leaving behind tales of strange events, echoing laughter in empty hallways, the soft creak of footsteps when no one was around, and sudden drops in temperature that seemed to cling to visitors like a shroud. Locals told stories of the original owner, Charles Bally, an enigmatic man who amassed a fortune in the railroads, but was said to have dabbled in the occult. Rumor had it he performed dark rituals within the mansion, using the basement as his personal temple. When Charles mysteriously vanished one stormy night, the house fell silent, and in time, it was passed to new owners. But the quiet didn't last long. Decades later, another family moved into the house, the Lamberts. Almost immediately, they experienced disturbances. Whispering voices that seemed to come from the walls, strange drafts in windowless rooms, and eerie cold spots that left them feeling watched. Mrs. Lambert tried to dispel the rumors, inviting friends for lavish parties, hoping the laughter would fill the emptiness and erase the mansion's sinister history. One evening, during a particularly grand gathering, the Lamberts' youngest daughter, Eliza, disappeared. Guests scoured every inch of the mansion, but she was nowhere to be found. Just as they were ready to call for the authorities, they heard her faint voice drifting down from the attic. Hurrying up the creaky steps, they found her standing in the center of the dusty room, staring at a spot in the corner where an old, rotting trunk sat. When asked what she was doing, Eliza whispered, "I was just playing hide and seek with him." The Lamberts left soon after, but rumors swirled that Eliza had returned home different, more reserved, her gaze always distant as if haunted by something no one else could see. Each family that lived there afterward reported similar experiences: unseen forces, mysterious shadows, and an overwhelming feeling of dread. In the years since, Bally Mansion was abandoned, left to rot as ivy grew up its stone walls and the windows dulled with dust. Yet the locals swear, on quiet nights, they still hear footsteps echoing through the empty halls and see candlelight flickering in the attic windows, where Eliza once stood. And now, someone new had taken an interest in the old mansion. A team of paranormal investigators arrived on a foggy evening, determined to uncover the mansion's secrets. The team arrived just as dusk settled, casting long, eerie shadows across the mansion's face. Their leader, Ava Sinclair, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for uncovering the truth behind even the darkest legends, was unfazed by the tales surrounding Bally Mansion. To her, it was another case, another haunted house with tragic history, but something about the mansion felt different, almost aware. As they stepped through the arched doorway, the air grew thick, carrying a strange, musty smell that hinted at years of neglect and something else, something cold and metallic. They fanned out, each investigator equipped with cameras, recorders, and motion sensors. They planned to document everything, to piece together the truth behind the strange happenings. In the parlor, they found antique furniture covered with dust, as if frozen in time. When one of the crew members, Marcus, leaned over to examine an old photograph on the wall, he let out a startled yelp. The picture showed Charles Bally himself standing with his family, their faces stern and watchful. But what caught Marcus's attention was something that wasn't supposed to be there: a faint figure behind Charles. A dark shape with hollow eyes peering directly out of the frame. "A trick of the light," Ava said, brushing it off as they continued deeper into the house. But the deeper they went, the heavier the silence seemed to become, pressing in around them until it felt like they were being watched from all sides. They made their way up to the attic, following a set of winding stairs, each step creaking beneath their weight. The attic was filled with relics from a bygone era. Dusty trunks, torn drapes, broken dolls, and a large, ornate mirror in one corner that caught Ava's eye. She moved closer, feeling a strange pull as if something or someone wanted her to look deeper. Suddenly, a soft, distant whisper filled the room. The team froze, all eyes darting around in alarm. Did anyone hear that?" asked Sarah, the newest member, her face pale. Marcus nodded, his hand trembling as he raised his camera. "Sounded like a child, a little girl's voice, right?" Ava leaned closer to the mirror, feeling an almost magnetic pull, and whispered, "Eliza, is that you?" The air shifted, and suddenly, the mirror clouded over. For a split second, she saw a young girl's face staring back at her pale, with hollow, searching eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. In that moment, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, followed by a strange, dragging sound. The group exchanged uneasy glances. "That came from the basement," Ava murmured, clutching her flashlight tighter. She led the way, ignoring the growing sense of dread that gnawed at her. They descended the stairs, their footsteps echoing louder than before. When they reached the basement door, they hesitated. Marcus broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. Do we really need to go down there?" Ava nodded, her jaw set. "Whatever's hiding in this house, it's down there. We need to finish what we started." They stepped into the basement, their flashlights piercing the darkness. The air was damp and cold, the walls lined with strange symbols, half faded and drawn in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. At the center of the room, an old, worn chair stood facing away from them, and there, shackled to the wall. "Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story," was a thick, rusted chain, coiled like a serpent. It hung limply now, but its links were unnaturally polished, as though someone or something had recently handled them. Ava's flashlight swept the basement, catching glimmers of scratched marks on the stone floor beneath the chain. They were deep, claw-like grooves, spiraling outward in a pattern that seemed to form a circle. "These marks," Ava whispered, tracing her fingers along one of the grooves. "They look like someone tried to get out." Sarah shuddered, backing away from the chain. "Or something was kept in." Before Ava could respond, the temperature plummeted, and their breath came out in frosty clouds. Shadows began to coalesce at the edges of their vision, swirling just beyond the flashlight beams, thickening like a living fog. Then, a low, guttural voice filled the basement, rumbling through the air as if echoing from another realm. "Leave this place," it commanded, each word scraping against the walls, reverberating through their bones. Ava took a shaky breath, holding her ground. "Who are you? What happened to Eliza?" The shadows shifted, pulling together until they formed the faint outline of a man tall, with sharp, hollow eyes. His gaze pierced through them, as if judging each soul for their presence in his domain. It was unmistakably Charles Bally, his spectral form somehow more imposing in death than in life. "This house," he intoned, his voice barely more than a whisper now, "will keep its secrets, just as it has always done. No one leaves without offering a piece of themselves." With that, the door to the basement slammed shut, sealing the team in darkness. Their flashlights flickered, sputtering as an unseen force seemed to sap the energy from the very air around them. Panic set in. Marcus pounded on the door, his voice frantic. "Open up. This isn't funny." But Ava knew it was no joke. She could feel the presence tightening around them, closing in like a vice. She turned back to face Charles, steeling herself. "What do you want from us?" His form wavered, almost dissolving, but his eyes remained, locked onto her. "A soul for a soul," he whispered, pointing a skeletal finger at Sarah, who backed away, trembling. "One must stay to keep the curse bound." Before they could react, Sarah let out a strangled scream, clutching her head as if something invisible had reached inside her mind, probing, taking hold. Her eyes glazed over, her voice dropping to a hollow murmur. "He's here, he's always been here. Watching, waiting." Ava grabbed Sarah, shaking her shoulders. "Snap out of it. Don't let him control you." But Sarah's expression was distant, her gaze fixed on something none of them could see. "It's too late," she whispered. "I've seen him in my dreams since we arrived." With sudden, unnatural strength, Sarah broke free from Ava's grip and staggered toward the chain, her footsteps eerily steady. She reached down, clasping the cold metal, as if drawn by an invisible force. Her face contorted with pain, but her hands wouldn't release the chain. The rest of the team watched in horrified silence as Charles's figure loomed closer, his translucent face twisting with a grim satisfaction. "It is done," he rasped, and the basement door creaked open behind them, as if granting passage to those who remained. But as the team scrambled for the exit, Ava hesitated, glancing back at Sarah, whose hands remained locked onto the chain, her eyes wide and empty. Ava's heart pounded as she watched her friend, now a ghost of herself, clutching the chain with an almost trance-like grip. The rest of the team urged her to leave, pulling at her arms, but she couldn't abandon Sarah not like this. "Sarah!" Ava shouted, her voice breaking. "Fight it! Come with us!" But Sarah didn't respond, her eyes, wide and lifeless, fixed on a distant point beyond the walls, as if she were staring through the veil of reality itself. The faintest of whispers escaped her lips, barely audible, yet chilling. "He wants to stay hidden," she murmured, "until he is freed." Ava felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the shadows around them thickened once again, filling the basement with an oppressive darkness. The air grew colder, pressing down on her chest, and she found it hard to breathe. It was as if something ancient and malevolent had awakened, feeding on their fear. Just then, Marcus, who had been by the door, gasped and pointed at the far wall. Carved deep into the stone were symbols some they'd seen before, but others were new, fresh, and almost pulsing with an unearthly energy. The symbols seemed to swirl together, forming words in an archaic language none of them understood. Ava stared at the symbols, feeling them pulse in sync with her own heartbeat. The symbols felt like a warning and a binding all at once, a seal meant to keep something at bay. She reached out toward them, her hand trembling as her fingers brushed the cold stone, and for an instant, a flash of images flooded her mind. A man in dark robes, standing alone in the basement, muttering incantations as shadows gathered around him, chains rattling as something clawed and scratched from the other side of the wall. A young girl's face, pale with fear, as she was led down to the basement. Ava stumbled back, breathless. She realized now that the curse of Bally Mansion wasn't just about Charles Bally, it was about what he'd tried to summon, what he'd bound within the house all those years ago. And the mansion, for all its eerie silence, was a prison. Suddenly, Sarah's voice rang out, sharper and clearer than before, jolting Ava back to the present. "He won't let me go." "Ava," Sarah said, her eyes focusing on her friend with a desperate clarity. "He needs a keeper, someone to hold him here, to keep him bound." "No!" Ava shouted, stepping forward. "We'll find another way. We'll break the curse. But you're coming with us, Sarah." But as she spoke, Sarah's face twisted with a sad smile, her grip tightening around the chain. "He's too strong, Ava. He's been waiting for so long." A strange wind whipped through the basement, extinguishing their flashlights completely. The darkness seemed alive, pressing in on them from all sides, and Ava felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder, a touch that felt both foreign and familiar, as though the house itself were trying to push her away. "Ava, we have to go." Marcus's voice was frantic now, his silhouette barely visible in the thickening shadows. Ava glanced back one last time at Sarah, her heart heavy with dread and guilt. But as she moved to turn away, Sarah spoke one last time, her voice soft and almost relieved. Tell them I stayed behind willingly," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "And promise me you'll close the door." Ava's throat tightened, but she nodded, backing away, her hand reaching for the doorknob. As they left the basement, the heavy wooden door creaked shut behind them, sealing Sarah inside. The team emerged from the mansion, shaken, each carrying a piece of the curse with them, a lingering shadow that they would never truly be able to leave behind. As the mansion loomed behind them, silent once more, Ava felt the faintest touch of a cold breeze, as if the house itself had exhaled. and from somewhere deep within, she thought she heard Sarah's voice, whispering a final, desperate warning. Ava's breath caught in her throat as she froze, her hand still gripping the doorknob. The soft whispering voice, so faint yet clear, seemed to echo through the night air. "You can never leave." Her heart raced, and she turned, her eyes scanning the mansion's dark windows. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire house was watching them, its empty windows like black, lifeless eyes. She shook her head, trying to rid herself of the creeping feeling that the mansion wasn't done with them yet, that it hadn't released its hold. "Let's go," Marcus urged, his voice shaky, but his feet moving toward the path that led back to the van. "Before something else happens." But Ava didn't follow immediately. She stood at the threshold, the weight of what they had left behind pressing down on her chest. Sarah's last words echoed in her mind, "Close the door," but what did that even mean? Had Sarah been protecting them, or had she been consumed by the house herself? She turned back to the mansion once more. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as though time itself had paused. No birds called out from the trees, no wind rustled the leaves. Just the heavy silence that felt like an oppressive weight, like the house was waiting for something. Without warning, a distant, sorrowful wail cut through the air, so high-pitched it made their teeth ache. Came from within the mansion, a sound that was not human. "Ava, we need to go." Sarah's name was still on Marcus's lips, but this time his voice was tinged with panic. That was her, wasn't it? Ava felt her body tense, an icy chill creeping up her spine. No, that wasn't Sarah. The voice sounded different, otherworldly. But it was close, too close. It was almost like the house itself was screaming, mourning, or warning them. Without a second thought, Ava spun on her heels and bolted toward the van. The others followed, but the sound of their footsteps seemed drowned by a low rumble that began to shake the ground beneath them. The pavement cracked, and the air thickened with a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The mansion's silhouette loomed in the distance, almost as if it were rising up from the shadows, its windows flickering like a beacon. As they reached the van, Ava fumbled with the keys, but her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't get them into the ignition. Her heart was pounding so hard it was as if she could hear it in her ears. And then, the van's headlights blinked on, as if powered by something unseen. The engine roared to life. "Get in!" Marcus shouted, pulling open the door and jumping into the driver's seat. Ava didn't hesitate. She climbed into the passenger seat, her hands still shaking, her mind racing. "What the hell just happened?" she muttered under her breath. The others piled into the back, and Marcus slammed the van into gear, tires screeching as they tore down the driveway and away from the mansion. For a moment it felt like they had escaped. The mansion fell behind them, swallowed by the darkness, and the heavy atmosphere lifted as they put distance between themselves and the cursed place. But as the van sped down the winding road, a thought nagged at the back of Ava's mind. She glanced into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the mansion behind them, but the reflection was different. The road stretched out behind them, empty and desolate, but the reflection in the glass showed the mansion, standing at the edge of the road, its silhouette twisted and darker than before. "No," she whispered, gripping the edge of her seat. "It's not over." Before anyone could respond, the van's headlights flickered, dimming and brightening in an erratic pattern. Then, without warning, they went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The sound of the engine sputtered, and the van came to a jarring halt, as though it had hit something invisible. The air in the van grew heavy once again, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere had thickened with the weight of something ancient and angry. Outside, the night seemed to stretch unnaturally long, the road now shrouded in a thick, almost tangible fog that had not been there just moments before. Marcus cursed under his breath, trying to restart the van. "What the hell's going on? Why won't it start?" Ava's eyes widened as she stared out the windshield. The fog wasn't just creeping up around them, it was moving. And within the mist, she saw shapes. Shadows, indistinct but unmistakable, moving closer, drawn toward them as if they were alive. Figures formed from the mist, and with each passing second, they seemed more tangible, more real. "Get out of the van!" Ava screamed. "Now!" But before they could even open the doors, the figures emerged fully from the fog, coalescing into the shape of a woman, Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but there was something off about her, something unnatural in her expression. And then, behind her, standing taller and darker than the rest, was the form of Charles Bally, his spectral eyes glowing faintly with malice. The mist thickened, swirling around the van, and Ava's heart pounded as she realized they weren't alone. Sarah's hollow eyes locked onto hers, the faintest trace of recognition in her gaze. "We shouldn't have left," Sarah whispered, her voice distant, hollow. "He won't let you go." Charles Bally's figure towered behind her, his form flickering like an illusion, but his presence felt very real, too real. The ground beneath the van trembled, and the air grew so cold they could see their breath in the sudden frost. Marcus slammed his foot on the gas, but the van wouldn't move. It was as if the fog itself had trapped them, like the house had reached out across the miles to pull them back. The headlights flickered again, and then everything went black. When the team woke, the fog had lifted, and the van was parked on a quiet road, miles away from where they had last been. The mansion was gone. No mist, no figures, but the air was heavy with something they couldn't explain. Ava turned to her team, her face pale. "We're not done. It's still out there, and it's waiting for us to return." And deep in the heart of Philadelphia, Bally Mansion stood once more, its lights dimly flickering as if calling them back. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.